Masechet Rosh Hashana Daf Gimel, and what a daf it is. Very little halachic content, but very rich in historical reconstruction, which is one of my favorite things to do. So we'll have a lot of really fascinating things to say about this. The rabbis worked very carefully. It's quite amazing how much time they spent in doing this historical reconstruction. They had the benefit of living 1700 years ago and being very careful readers of Tanakh. Modern historians have the benefit of building on their work and also having modern archaeology and sources from the Babylonians, Persians, and Greeks. And so we'll a few times compare what the rabbis in the Talmud have to say with what modern historians have to say. And often they align and sometimes they don't align, and we'll point all this out. Okay, the Mishnah mentioned that Nissan is a new year, is the head of the year for kings. So that would be, and kings was the basis of the calendar. Whenever you're going to date something, you're going to write the year of the king. So this is really important, and it wants to find a proof. So that's what we were in the middle of Rabbi Yochanan's proof. So just a background about modern historians. Modern historians show that the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, and northern Israel and the north of Israel, the northern kingdom, used Nissan years for their kings. So that's we can tell this from Babylonian documents. Nebuchadnezzar is clear. And on the other hand, Judea and Persia, the southern kingdom and Persia, uses Tishrei years. So this is quite clear for Babylonia and Persia. For Israel and Judea, it's not so clear from the book of Melachim. There is a place of overlapping kings from the north and the south, where there's a 6-month period, and you could tell that the northern kingdom and southern kingdom are actually using different systems. Which way it is has a lot of discussion, but most modern historians say it's this way. Okay, so this is really interesting because what we're going to see today is 3 proofs. Number 1, Rabbi Yochanan's proof for Nissan years, and he's proving it from King Shlomo, which makes sense that would be Nissan years. So that matches up. King Shlomo is actually before the split, very early. So the earlier the king, the more likely they're using Nissan years. So this is most likely historically accurate and agrees with the best assessment of modern historians. But then we're going to see a second proof of Rabbi Elazar, also proving Nissan years and also proving it from King Shlomo. So this again matches up. And we're going to end the daf with Rav Chista's proof that the Persians used Tishrei years. Some very interesting proofs there. And that also matches up with what modern historians have shown from even more documents. So let's get right into it. We're right in the middle of Rabbi Yochanan's proof. Let's review what his proof is so far. He quoted this pasuk, very important pasuk in Melachim Aleph, that says it was the 480th year since they left Egypt, and in the 4th year of the reign of King Solomon, Bechodesh Ziv hu chachodesh hasheni limloch Shlomo al Yisrael. So even if you had just this yellow highlighted part, that actually would be enough to prove it, because Chodesh Ziv is the ancient name of the month of Iyar. Iyar is a Babylonian name. This is the ancient biblical name, and it says that Iyar is the 2nd month for the reign of Shlomo. So therefore Iyar, which is the 2nd month from Nissan. So this by itself proves that King Shlomo, and this is 4th year. So it's not like he just started in Nissan. Already in the 4th year, they're starting the 1st month of Nissan and the 2nd month in Iyar. So that by itself is a proof. But we add to that, Rabbi Yochanan adds to that the first half of the pasuk is mentioning Yetziat Mitzrayim, and therefore that also shows that we're counting 2 Yetziat Mitzrayim, which happened in Nisan. Okay, so that's the beginning of the proof. We ask about that. How do you know that the first half of the pasuk, even though it's counting 480 years from Yetziat Mitzrayim, maybe nevertheless it's counting up each year in Tishrei? So it really could be 479 and a half years. It started in Nisan, but in Tishrei, that's when it goes up to the next one. So it's a theoretical possibility. And so we prove that cannot be from these 3 events that have to happen in order. Aaron dies in the 40th year since Exodus in the 5th month. Then Sichon is killed. And we proved that that has to be after Aharon because it says Sichon / Canaan, we say is the same person, they saw that Aharon died, and they were and therefore they saw an opportunity. Bnei Israel themselves saw or were afraid or were exposed. We saw that Dirasha and Vayid'u. So therefore Sichon took the opportunity when Aharon died and the clouds of glory went away to attack. So this happened after that. And it says the 5th month, so there's a Tishrei, 7th month right after this. And then Moshe's oration in the beginning of the Devim happened in the 40th year in the 11th month. And it says there explicitly that was after Sichon. So certainly these are in chronological order, makes perfect sense. And now you went from the 5th month to the 11th month, and you're still in the 40th year, although you had a Tishrei in the middle. So that proves that Tishrei does not up the count of years, therefore has to be Nissan. So this is a very fine proof. Now we're going to ask, well, it does prove that it can't be Tishrei, but it doesn't necessarily have to be Nissan. Maybe it's Iyar, maybe it's Sivan. All right, it could be actually any time before the 5th month or the 12th month. Also, it could be, and as long as it's not between the 5th and the 11th, it would still remain the 40th year, and you could still have these 3 things in order. So that's what we're going to discuss right now. So ve'ema Rosh Hashana Iyar. Maybe it could be, in fact, be Iyar. This is all theoretical. I mean, really, the 2 options are Tishrei or Nissan. Historically, is what different kingdoms have done. But nevertheless, we want to look for a definite proof. So we say, no, can't be. La sakada'atech tichtiv. The Mishkan was built in the 2nd year and on the 1st month, Rosh Chodesh Nissan of the 2nd year since Exodus. And 1 month later, and the 20th day, so about 50 days later, it says that the cloud of glory went up so they can start traveling. And still, you see, it calls it the 2nd year. Now, if Iyar was a new, you uptick in the Rosh Chodesh Iyar, then this would have had to be in the 3rd year. Since when you're in Nissan, it calls it the 2nd year. And in Iyar, in the middle of the Iyar, it still calls it the 2nd year. So Iyar can't be when you count, add up and increase the year. Good proof. Now, ve'ema Rosh Hashana Sivan. Let's try the next one. It could be Sivan and still work with everything we've seen before. No. La sakada'atech. Don't think that. Tichtiv. B'chodesh hashilishi leset b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Misraim. Ve'im ita b'chodesh hashilishi b'shana hashanit leset v'gomer miba'eleh. So finally in the 3rd month, they get, and this is in the 1st year since Exodus, in the 3rd month they get to Har Sinai. And if Rosh Chodesh Sivan, which is the 3rd month, would be the new year, then you'd have to call that the 2nd year. But it doesn't. It still calls it the 1st year. So that's a good proof. All right. Ve'ema Tammuz. Let's go to the next one, the 4th month. Ve'ema Av. Ve'ema Adar. It could be Av, it could be the last month. All these are between the 2 months mentioned above. So it could be any of these, and we don't have proofs for each one of these 3 months. So therefore, we're left without an answer for Rabbi Yochanan, and basically Rabbi Yochanan does not have a complete proof. And so we turn to Rabbi Yochanan, the 2nd generation. We turn to Rabbi Elazar ben Pedat, who's just after Rabbi Yochanan. Ela Amar Rabbi Elazar mehacha. He has a different proof altogether, which is much shorter. Vayachel livnot b'chodesh hasheni b'sheni b'shnat arba l'malchuto. Pasuk in Divrei Yamim, that's talking about King Shlomo again building the Bet HaMikdash, and it says he began to build it, and there's a repetition here, in the 2nd month, on the 2nd, in the 4th year of King Solomon's reign. So this, in the 2nd month, on the 2nd, what is this extra word? It's hard to read. Mai sheni, lav sheni leyerach shemonim bo lemalchuto. This number 2 must be the 2nd month of King Solomon's reign. So what you have here is he began in the 2nd month since Nissan is Iyar, which is also the 2nd month since he began to reign. And this is a very nice proof. Okay, now we're going to have a problem. Matkif la ravina, ve'ema sheni b'chodesh. It doesn't actually say it's the second month of his reign. You could read it as follows. He began to build it in the second month, on the second of that month, right? On the second day of that month. Well, imken sheni b'chodesh behedjahava ketiv be. Now, if that were so, it would have said b'sheni lachodesh. That's if you look at dates throughout Tanakh, it always says it in that way, the second month, the second day of that month. So it would have had to repeat, add another word. So, okay, that's actually true. Maybe it means it's the second day of the week that it started on Yom Sheni, on Monday. Actually, no, that can't be either, because look throughout dates in the whole Tanakh, and it basically never tells you the day of the week that anything happened. It's not a very significant marker in Tanakh dates. There is an exception, which is Bereshit Perek Aleph, where it says Vayed Vayboker Yom Sheni, and the Yerushalmi actually brings that up, but it says no. B'riyat Ha'olam is different. That's talking about actual 7 days. So this is true. It wouldn't really make sense to say that. Ve'od Makish Sheni Batra the Sheni Kama, and furthermore, they're juxtaposed. They're right next to each other. Ma Sheni Kama Chodesh, Av Sheni Batra Chodesh. If the first one's talking about the second month, this is also talking about the second month, but counting from a different spot. Well, the first one is counting from Nissan. The second one is counting from the beginning of the regnal year of King Solomon, which no matter when he started, or any king starts, will always be starting in counting from Nissan. Okay, so this is really nice. Here's just a couple of a little bit of discussion about this very pasuk Hasheni Basheni. Radak says maybe it is actually talking about Monday, right? So he thinks that may be the Peshat, although he does notice, and she brings us also a pasuk from last week's Parashat HaShavua that says V'mayim hayu haloch v'chasor ad hachodesh asiri. The water kept going until the 10th month, and then ba'asiri b'echad hachodesh. So you see, he repeats asiri, and here is clearly referring to the month, to just add more detail. It was the 10th of the month, and the 10th of the month, you know when? On the 1st. And the heads, the tops of the hills were seen. So actually, you can see a structure like this, a repetition of the month number in other places, and so therefore, this could very well be a good reading, and that is it be Elazar's proof. Good. So far we have 2 proofs. That's all we're going to have for this, and we end this discussion with a Baraita. Let's read this Baraita carefully. The Baraita consists of a list of Pisukim. In fact, all the Pisukim that we saw above is just going to list them, kind of like a mnemonic device. If you know these Pisukim, you can fill in the arguments that we said about each one. Let's try to remember what each one was. Tanya kevated Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, this opening here is curious because it's quoting it as a Baraita that will prove what Rabbi Yochanan says. We're going to see the end of this Baraita actually quotes the pasuk of Rabbi Elazar, this one from Divrei Yamim. So it's not really clear. It's actually proving Rabbi Yochanan. It's quoting both of them. All right, but let's see it. How do we know that we count the regnal year from Nissan, always Nissan years? Shene Emad. The first pasuk we had before, the 480 years, and over there it said that that was Ziv, and King Shlomo began to build in that year, and it's connected to Yisrael Mitzrayim. So you see that King Solomon's years are connected to Yisrael Mitzrayim. Uchtiv vayal laharon hakohen el hod hahar al pi Hashem. Because we asked, how do you know that when it's counting 480 years, it's counting from Nissan? It could still be counting from Tishrei. And so we brought these 2 events, which happened in the 40th year, the first one in the 5th month, and the next one in the 11th month, and they're both called in the 50th in the 40th year. So therefore, they have to be in order. And Nissan it has to be from Nissan. It can't be Tishrei, because Tishrei would up the count in the middle of them. And in the middle, and it has to be in that order. First, Aaron died, and then Moshe gave the speech, because in the middle of it is the killing of Sichon, and Sichon was still around when Aharon died, because Ve'omer Vayishma HaKenaani, and we said that Sichon is the same as Kenaani, which is also difficult historically, but okay. And so they heard that Aharon died, And it also says, "V'omer vayid'u kol ha'ada ki gava Aharon." And all of Israel, the Peshat says, saw that Aharon died. But we mentioned that the word ki can also mean because. Vayid'u, they were exposed or they were afraid because Aharon died. And so they knew that they were exposed and the enemy came. So therefore, we know that Sichon was still around when Aharon died. And furthermore, the pasuk says, in the first month of the second year, right? This is how we knew that it was not an iyar, because you have this pasuk here that is the first month of the second year. And this is the month after that, and it still calls it the same year, so therefore it cannot be iyad. And this is how we know it can't be Sivan either, because it's the third month of that first year when they left Egypt, and it still calls it the first year. So Sivan cannot be the new year when you would count up. Okay, all that was the discussion that we had about Rabbi Yochanan, and we ended there because we had no answer to the other months. And then and then it quotes the pasuk that we had for Rabbi Elazar from Divrei Hayamim. Okay, so this is all the pasukim that we had so far. It's very curious that it quotes this as a Baraita, because Rabbi Yochanan himself only quoted the first couple of Pesukim here. The rest of the Pesukim were part of the Shakla v'Tarya that the Amoraim and the Stam asked about each of the other months and other possibilities. And so all of that discussion that came over many generations later are all quoted in this Baraita. And this Baraita actually ends not with Rabbi Yochanan, but with Rabbi Elazar. So it seems to me that this list was a mnemonic when they memorized the whole Talmud. So how did they memorize it? Not necessarily word for word, but they memorized a list. So here you memorize this list of Pisukim, and from that you can reconstruct all of the arguments. And for some reason, it's mentioned as a Baraita. It does include Rabbi Yochanan, it's true, but it includes Rabbi Elazar also, which is the bottom line of this sugya. Okay, and now we get to the next part, which is going to be Rav Chisda, and he's going to prove that in Persia they used Tishrei years. So let's see his proof. Amar Rav Chisda, Lo shanu ela lemalchei Yisrael, aval malchut umot haolam mit Tishrei maninan. He says only for the Israelite kings do we use Nissan, but for the other nations we use Tishrei. So he's saying all the other nations. But his proofs are going to be from the Persian Empire, right? This is not true of the Babylonians, but his proofs are true for the Persian empires. Let's see. Empire, the Achaemenid Empire of the Persians. Shneimar, Divrei Nehemiah ben Chachaliah. ויהי בחודש כסלו שנת 20 וגומר, וכתיב, ויהי בחודש ניסן שנת 20 לארתחשסתא. Okay, the Gemara on the next soon is going to quote the whole paragraphs of this, but I'll summarize them now so we can follow. Nehemiah chapter 1:1 and then Nehemiah 2:1. Nehemiah 1:1 introduces Nehemiah that he's an officer in the court of the king. He's a wine pourer, and it says there that one time he got a report of what's going on in Jerusalem, how the Jews in Yerushalayim, in Judea, are really suffering, and he's very sad. So Nehemiah 1 is the report. Nehemiah 2:1 is he's standing in front of the king. He serves King Artaxerxes, is Artaxerxes, and he's very sad. And the king says, "Why are you sad? Why are you looking down? You're usually a happy guy." And he says, "Listen, I just got a report about what happened to my brethren." And the king says, "You know what?" And he says, "Can I go help them?" And the king says, "Yes, you can go help them." So clearly 2:1 happened after 1:1. And why is that important for us? Because it says bechodesh Kislev. This is in Kislev, which is the 9th month, is when he first gets the report. And the second thing happens in the month of Nissan. And so Nissan, well, is that before or after? It calls them both the 20th year of the king. So they're both in the same regnal year. And you see in the same regnal year, first comes Kislev, the 9th month, and then comes Nissan, which is the first month. Now, if Nissan was the beginning of the year, then that would be the 21st year. So we prove from here that, in fact, it's Tishrei is the beginning of the year, and therefore it follows Kislev and then Nissan. This is an amazing proof. It's right on target. Question?
Yeah, I'm just curious, how would you know that this is how in Persia they did it? Maybe it's how the Jews did it in Persia.
This is okay. So, right, this is not based on Persian documents, but rather based on Nehemiah, who lives in Persia, and he's talking about what he sees.
Right.
So yeah, so it could be that is possible that the Jews under the Persian Empire might be using a different system, but it wouldn't really make sense because the system is based on the years of Artaxerxes. So it really wouldn't make sense for the Jews to change. And says that Artaxerxes himself says, this is my 20th year. The Jews are going to come and say, no, we think it's your 21st year, right? So it would be strange for that to happen. So I think I think this works very well. Okay, now now we're just explaining it. Since he's in the first year, in the first event, he's in it's happening in Kislev, and he calls it the 20th year. And then the second event, Nissan, and then the Nissan is still the 20th year. Rosh Hashana, Lav Nisanhu. Well, Nisan's right there in the middle. Rosh Chodesh Nisan's in the middle. Therefore, Nisan is not the beginning of the year. Okay, good proof. Now, Bishlama he'ach mefaresh de la'ar shasta elahai mimai de la'ar shasta. Okay, the name of the king Artashasta only appears in the second pasuk, not in the first pasuk. So maybe the first pasuk is saying the 20th year of something else, right? Somebody else's birthday or something. Now, really, that's not convincing. It's the 20th year, of course, of him. So Dilma Liminyana Harinahu, but still, let's see if we can prove it. Amara Papa, Shanat Asrim, Ligzera Shava, Ma'atam le'aratach shasta, apacha le'aratach shasta. So Papa says we're going to use a Gezerah Shava. This Gezerah Shava is again right on, because just read the Pisukim in context, and it's obvious he's talking about the same king and the same count, even though they're not right next to each other. It's the same phrase, and they're one chapter away, and one continues on the heels of the other. Good. Hold on. How do you know these perakim are in order? Maybe chapter 2 happened first before chapter 1. Now, this makes no sense, which is exactly what the Gemara says. Tevarim she'amar Hanani leNehemiah bekislev, amaran Nehemiah lamelech benisan. It can't be, because the things that the messenger from Judea, Hanani, told Nehemiah in Kislev are the very same, is this very same report that Nehemiah told the king later. Nehemiah could not have known the report before he received the report in Kislev, and then he could tell it to the king after. And so here this is unusual for the Gemara to quote almost the whole chapter here. What did Hanani tell Nehemiah in Kislev? It says, Shneimar, Dibre Nehemiah ben Chachalya. That's the opening words of the book of Nehemiah. Vahi bechodesh Kislev, Shenat Asrim, Va'ani hayiti b'Shushan habira. Good, he's in Shushan, and he's a minister for the king. Vayavo Hanani echad me'achai hu va'anashim Yehuda va'eshalem al haYehudim. I guess I don't know if how often people traveled, but one time this Hanani came with other people from Yehuda, and I asked him, how are the Jews doing there? Al haYehudim apeleta ashenish'aru min hashebi v'al Yerushalayim, the ones that had survived the exile, and people of Jerusalem, how are they doing? They said, oh, they're in a very bad place, suffering hardship. The walls are broken, the gates are burnt with fire. So this is a very bad situation. Maran Nehemiah lamelech benisan. Then 1 month, one chapter later, and a couple of months later, Nehemiah got an opportunity, and he told the king, benisan, shene'emar v'hi bechodesh Nisan shenat esrim la'artach shasta hamelech. Yain lefanav va'esa al hayayin va'etena lemelech velo hayiti ra lefanav. In that year, there was wine in front of the king, and I took the pitcher of wine, I took the wine, and I gave it to the king. And usually I was never sad in his presence any time before that. So, but this time it was different. And so the king asked me, what's the matter with you? Right? What, you sick? You look like you're depressed. לעולם יחיה, מדוע לא יראו פניי, אשר העיר בית קברות אבותיי חרבה ושעריה הוקלו באש. And he said, why should I not be sad when the city, the place of the tombs of where my tombs of my forefathers are, lies waste. It's a beautiful description of Jerusalem and of Israel, and it's all burnt with fire. That's why I'm sad. And so the king says, so do you have anything to request? So the king even opens and saying, I want to help. This all sounds like Megillat Esther words, right? First he prays and then he says, yes, you're so gracious. Would you allow me to go to Judea as a representative of the empire, as an official, and then I can go there and I can help them to rebuild the place of my forefathers. So the king says, and in parentheses, is, by the way, his consort was next to him. I don't know if that means like he was preoccupied or it was very official. He says, okay, when you're going and when you're coming back. In other words, yes, you have permission to go. So I told him the time, and he was happy to send me. Okay, wonderful story, and this is the story of Nehemiah under Artaxerxes. And anyway, you see clearly that the second chapter happened after the first. All right, good. So our proof that the Persians used Tishrei stands. We have a question here from Haggai. This, I think, the Peshat is not such a great question. Let's see. Mativ Rav Yosef. B'yom 24 lachodesh b'shishi b'shnat shetayim leDaryavish. Okay, now it's talking about Darius, who was actually a king before Artaxerxes. Darius was responsible for rebuilding the second Bet HaMikdash. They got permission under his reign to build it. And it says on the 24th day of the 6th month, in the second year of Daryavish. That's in Haggai 1:15. And right after that, it says, Uchtiv, Bashebi'i, Bishnat Shetayim Be'esrim Bechad Chodesh. And then it says, in the 7th month, also in the second year. And so you see, if it's first is the 6th month, and then the 7th month is Tishrei. And this is a challenge to the Tishrei years, because if it's Tishrei years, then when it goes from the 6th month to the 7th month, it should go to the 8th year. So what's going on here? This is a challenge. All right, it does look like a good challenge, except for the fact that it misquotes the pasuk. The words Bishnat Shetayim are not in the original. In the original, it says Bashivi'i. It doesn't say what year it is. So actually, it could just be following the heels. This was the 20th year, the 6th month, and then the 7th month. It doesn't tell you what year, but very likely they would have called it the 21st year. So this is difficult. You have to assume that, I guess the Gemara is assuming that if it was a different year, it would have to say the 21st year. But I think not necessarily. So I think the modern historians would just say, it doesn't say anything at all. So it's not really a challenge. But anyway, the Gemara thinks it is a challenge. So we have to answer it. Amar Rabbi Abhu, Kodesh melech kasher haya. Lefichach manu lo kemalche Yisrael. Okay, Rabbi Abahu is trying to answer this, but the answer has some questions on it itself. So he says, Kodesh, now this was talking about Darius, who was responsible for building the Bet HaMikdash. So Rabbi Abahu, calling him Kodesh for some reason, even though it's a different person, he says he was a righteous king. Kodesh is the one, he's called Mashiach in the book of Yeshaya. He tells the Jews they can go back and return to their land. Since he was a righteous king, he gets to be counted, use Nissan as the regnal year, like the Jewish kings do. And so that would explain that Darius equals Kodesh. We'll see why, follows Nissan, whereas Artaxerxes doesn't. He follows Tishrei like the other Persian kings, because he was not so righteous. Actually, he let Nehemiah go. I don't know why they think he's not righteous. But okay, so now that's Rabbi Abahu's answer. Well, to clarify his answer, Matkif la Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Rabbi Abu, what are you talking about? Hadad imken kashu kira'e ahadade tichtib v'shesi beta dena ad yom telata liyerach adar tihi shenat shit lemalchut Daryavesh malka. So first, Rav Yosef is going to bring yet another set of Pesukim that are about Darius, the very same king that we were just talking about here. And over here, it proves that Darius, in fact, used Tishrei, a Tishrei year. How do we see this? Because it says in Ezra, the house was finished on the third month, on the third of the month of Adar, right? Adar, which is the 12th month of the year, which is in the 6th year of the reign of Darius. Okay, so this the Bet HaMikdash was finished in the 6th year. This corresponds to 516 BCE, by the way, in case you're interested. V'tanya, be'oto zaman l'shana haba'a ala Ezra miBabel v'galuto imo. Uchtiv v'yavo Yerushalem b'chodesh hachamishi hi shenat hashibi'it la melech. So here it says that Ezra came from Shushan to Jerusalem after the Bet HaMikdash was built. How long after? Well, let's see. It says at that time, on the next year, so it's at least a year later, Ezra comes from Bavel. And when did he get there? He comes to Jerusalem in the 5th month of the 7th year. So this is, right, we went from 6th year, 12th month, to the 7th year, the 5th month. And vim'ita shenata sheminit miba'ele, but really it should be the 8th, because it has to be at least a whole year past. The Gemara here doesn't quote all the necessary Pesukim. Here's a couple of more of them. Here it says that after they built the Bet HaMikdash, then the people in Jerusalem did Korban Pesach. So you see that after they built the Bet HaMikdash in the 12th month of the 6th year, then Nissan comes, and that would be then the the following year, and or at least a month later. And so Ezra didn't come yet on that Nissan. And then in the next perek, it says that on the first of Lachodesh Harishon, the first of Nissan, he started his journey. Ezra started his journey, and he only arrived 5 months later in Chodesh HaChamishi. So you see that it's a full year and a half from the second event to the first event. And so therefore, we see here that if you're going to count this from Nissan, then you're gonna have to add, right? We started in 6th year, the 12th month. So the first Nissan will be the 7th year, and then a whole nother is going to be the 8th, which is the 8th year. And so therefore we have an internal contradiction. Okay, so this is one challenge. And furthermore, what are you comparing? Hatam Kodesh Hachad Daryavesh. You mentioned, you brought a proof from Kodesh, but we're talking about Daryavesh. And so why are you bringing one? Why saying Kodesh was righteous? So he went from Nissan, right? But the proof you had before was about Darius, not about Kodesh. And so we answer Tana. Who Kodesh? Who Daryavesh? Who Artach Shasta? There's a Baraita that says all these three people are one and the same. Kodesh Melech Kasher Haya. Kodesh is a nickname. Then you have to switch around the letters, and it says Kasher. He was a good guy. Artach Shasta al Shem Malchuto. The kingdom was named Artach Shasta. Umas Shemo, his personal name was Daryavesh. And so actually all of these are talking about the very same person. Mikom Makom Kashya. Okay, so still now that we have a challenge, even if they're all the same person. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak la Kashya. Kan kodem shechmitz, kan achar shechmitz. They're all talking about Cyrus, and when he was a good guy, then we counted from Nissan, and that explains the Nissan Pesukim, like the one from Chagai up here. Right. And in the other cases, And the other case, the first proof that you brought from Tishrei, that was after this same Kodesh, who has 3 different names. That's after he became corrupt, then switched and used the Tishrei years. Okay, tomorrow we'll see when that switch happened, what happened to Kodesh. But just for right now, we should point out that historical sources based on like Herodotus, Greek historians of the Persian Empire, and also plenty of archaeology shows that these, in fact, were all different people, and we know all about each one of them. Cyrus is the one that tells the Jews they can go back in 539, and they don't get a chance to rebuild the Bet HaMikdash because they run into roadblocks. And then the next 2 are not mentioned in Tanakh, but he did have a son. Then Darius is the one that in 516 helps them rebuild the Bet HaMikdash. Xerxes is Ahasuerus of the Purim story. Artaxerxes is the one that we mentioned who was the ruler during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. So this is the historical order, and they were in fact all different people. And we can actually go back, and as we saw, the Pisukim work very well, and for all of them, that they all followed the Tishrei year, which is what Rav Chista's thesis was to begin with. So we saw all the really quite fascinating halachic reconstructions, and how careful, and it's quite amazing how much time and effort the rabbis did spend in putting together this historical overview, and so therefore well worth our time to understand their arguments and also to compare them to modern sources. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.